Hello, this is Dr. Perry Cowles, and I'm going to be giving a review of the recent um, movie Black Panther. This review will be a little bit different than most reviews. This review will be from a Pan-Africanist perspective. So I'll just get right into it. And before we even get into the aspects of the movie, we have to at least mention the organization, the Black Panthers, that was started in 1966 in Oakland. Even though this film is about a science fiction film about a Marvel character, we have to talk about the Black Panthers because, in large part, the social capital that is provided by the Black Panthers was appropriated by Marvel and Ryan Coogler and those who are responsible for the production of this movie. So we have to at least say something about them. Now, in the eyes of the majority of the Black population in the United States and many people throughout the world, the Black Panthers were pretty cool, right? They stood up against the status quo. They stood up against the bigotry and racism and violence against the Black community. They used their constitutional rights to carry weapons, as you see them there in the California State House. And what they are protesting on this day is laws that are designed to disarm people like them. Now, one important thing about them is that they did things like offer breakfast programs for their communities. And in the midst of providing these breakfast programs, they kind of pushed the government to begin to start providing similar types of free breakfast, free lunch programs. And not to mention, I mean, they always looked pretty cool. They had the big afros, the nice leather jackets. Several of them were just beautiful people, the men and the women. Uh, so our idea, our notion of the tough, cool Black Panthers, that provides what we call social capital, cultural currency, and that was appropriated in the film. That is reflected in the way that we perceive the movie. You can see that many. I know I saw it, and you probably saw it too when you went to the theater. You saw lots of people with dashikis on and things that were reflective of African culture and Black pride. So that was in large part because of the traditional Black Panthers and who and what we think about when we say the Black Panthers. Another important thing to mention about this film is that there were several Africanisms in this film, and I'm going to point some of these out. I think a good number of them you probably would notice, but me as an Africanist, they stood out very clearly to me. And one of those that stood out was the Queen Mother role that Angela Bassett played. In traditional African societies, there is the Queen Mother, always the highest ranking woman in society and always amongst the highest ranking people in that society as a whole. Maybe the wife of the king, maybe the mother of the king, but it's usually a woman with some age and very high stature. And her role is not only symbolic, her role is actual. She takes a proactive role and the things that go on within that group of people. So the queen mother role is very important. Now, even today, one of the great civilizations, great people of Africa are the Ashanti people, and they still have the queen mother. She's still there today. So this um, beautiful woman I'm showing you here is Queen Afia. She was the most recent queen mother, and I believe she lived to be over 100 years old. I think she was several years beyond 100 as queen mother of the Ashanti people of what is today in the country of Ghana. And Queen Afia that you see here on the picture has transitioned to the next realm. As a matter of fact, she transitioned in 2016, and the Ashanti people are currently in the process of stooling or throning the next queen mother. Another of the Africanisms that stood out was the character that was played by Forrest Whitaker, who's somewhat of a conjurer. But the role that he played was conjurer, priest, and griot. So you can see the conjurer aspect of Forrest Whitaker's character when he was able to take both kings into a different realm so they could speak with their fathers. He did that with T'Challa, and he did that with Killmonger. So that's one of the things that the traditional African priest does is lead rituals and medicine to take you between realms of existence and to sometimes change your mind state. You can also see how he was somewhat like a griot in that he was really the only person who could tell why T'Challa had this cousin who he didn't know was his cousin at the time, but why who Killmonger was, and it was Forrest Whitaker's character who was able to say, "Hey, this is who it is. This is probably who it is, and this is what happened." So this is a traditional role that was expressed very clearly in the film. And now you see probably the most famous African griot slash spiritualist of the 20th century, a man by the name of Ogo Tameli, who was a part of the Dogon tribe before he transitioned. Now the Dogon are exceedingly knowledgeable people, especially when it comes to science, and their great knowledge of science is combined with their religion and spirituality, and those two together we call that cosmology. But one of the things that the Dogon realized is what we call today the Big Bang, and they came to the realization of the Big Bang long before 1922, when the Western world created the the Hubble telescope, right? So how they know this, nobody knows, but the Dogon has exceptional knowledge of science and the way that the Earth responds to the whole of the solar system. So they are worth studying. Another Africanism, important Africanism, is the Wakandans' worship of the goddess Bast. And Bast is borrowed from the ancient Egyptian cosmology. Now, Bast was a black cat deity. So this fit right in with the theme of the movie. And Egyptian cosmology, they revere and they pedestal the female deities in the same way that they do the male deities. And Bast is the goddess of protection. So you see a range of personalities in the gods and goddesses of ancient Egypt, and Ba's particular contribution was that she was good luck, and she provided protection. And the ancient Egyptians actually had black um, cats for just because they liked them, and also, as some of you probably know, cats do a good job getting rid of, um, of rodents. So that was one Africanism that was just upfront in the movie. Another that may not have been clearly upfront was the scene when T'Challa was on the boat with his retinue and all of his people. He was kind of seated in a majestic way, as you see in this image right here, and that was like dancing around him. That is from like the records of ancient Egypt. When you go back and you read the records, they're records of the the kings traveling on the boats on the water and it being somewhat festive. They used to have to go from one location to another in Egypt by boat because the king's presence was necessary at religious functions and temples up and down the Nile River. So that was a very interesting borrowing. And another one, which I think stood out to everybody, was the greeting of the Wakandans. Here on the left, we see King Tut, and on the right, that's from one of the greatest temples known to man, which is the name of this temple, the most select and holiest of places. It was built by Pharaoh Hatshepsut, who is one of the great kings of Egypt, and was also a woman. That's an interesting story in itself. But in the movie, you see the Wakandans constantly greet each other, and in that way. So there were like a number of borrowings, and one of them that I have to mention, I don't have the image from the film, but I have to mention that when they were at the cliffs, and on the cliffs, T'Challa was about to be throned as king, and they had to get the permission, the approval of the various groups, tribes, or ethnic groups, and they had to either challenge or support T'Challa. Well, that scene, you can see the exact same thing in the movie Quilombo, when the prince was on the verge of being crowned king. The old king was ready to go out for different reasons, and then the new prince, the prince was on the verge of being crowned king. They went to each group, and the imagery of what we saw in Black Panther was nearly exactly the same of the imagery that we saw in the movie Quilombo. Quilombo is about Africans who stole themselves, right? Africans who ran away from the plantation and established independent communities in the interior of Brazil, and they had to fight off the Portuguese army. And it's a wonderfully interesting movie that must be seen. There were a number of things about the film that I really liked, and I think what I liked most about Black Panther was the character Oyoke. Oyoke was very interesting character. She could really throw down. I mean, and I think to some people, they may see that as fantastic or science fiction-y, that you have a successful woman warrior. But if you really think about it, with the right training, with the right diet, with the right like physical, mental, and spiritual development, a woman can compete with a man in combat. I'm not talking about like, an army where they just throw you in, and all of a sudden you're a soldier. I'm just saying that with training and the proper preparation, that I do think that a female warrior would be formidable, particularly if she's taken that responsibility seriously, despite the size advantage that most men have. And this film was situated in contemporary times, and everybody's in bad shape nowadays, right? I mean, fat or whatever, several different issues with health. So the fact that it was a female warrior, to me, that wasn't fantastic. But one of the things I liked about this character is that she was very principled. You can see how when Lupita's character came to her, she's like, "Hey, my loyalty is to Wakanda." Uh, there were a number of things that were really interesting about this character. She would be a good candidate for a spinoff. I thought, could you imagine a show with Ayoke, and even in her same role as general, and she's back and forth between Wakanda and different places in the world. She's flying ships. She's just doing a number of different things. She's dressed like you see in this image. Now this image just speaks of just confidence and just majesty and royalty, and of course also the gold braces that she's wearing around her neck is somewhat of an Africanism also. um, and she reminded me of the great general. Well, she's more than a general. She's kind of like the head of the society, and that is Queen Nzinga. And Queen Nzinga was the leader of Ndongo, and she eventually brought two communities together, Matamba and Ndongo. She was a very formidable general. In fact, she was socialized and conditioned by her father, Kalanji, to be so. So I see a lot of people are talking about the female warriors of Dahomey, and some of I may have seen one or two people mention Ya Asantewa, which was a female warrior of the Ashanti people, and both of them are really early 20th century warriors, particularly Ya Asantewa and the Dahomean lady warriors. They may have had their initial beginning in the late 19th century and going also into the 20th century. And there was a lot going on with that. Both of those societies had been hard hit by the Ma'afa, as some people know it, slavery. And both of those societies were involved in capturing people and enslaving and making them captives. However, Nzinga, as leader of Ndongo, she liberated enslaved communities, and she was an excellent stateswoman also. So her character kind of more so reminded me of Oyoke. So Queen Nzinga is definitely worth looking into. Another thing that stood out to me was the constant reference to the highlands. They mentioned it in the beginning of the movie when they talked about the one community that moved to the highlands where it's really cold, and they remained there. And then later, when the Queen Mother and various people went to that community in the highlands. Now the highlands of Central Africa reach about 15,000 feet, and I believe the highlands of Ethiopia reach also about 15,000 feet, maybe a little bit higher. But it's very cold in those areas, and in the highlands of Central Africa and Uganda, and moving westward in those areas, there are mountain gorillas. What you see in the highlands of Ethiopia are um, baboons, like what you see in this image, and that was kind of the reference in the movie to that when the CIA agent began to speak and they started making the ape sound. That was kind of a reference to that what exists in that geographical um, environment. So I mean that was like there was so many references to Africa in the movie, and I really like that aspect of the movie. I think Ryan Coogler, who produced this movie, and the other people along with him were on top of that uh, in terms of incorporating that aspect of Africa in to the movie. Also, the scene when T'Challa was about to be crowned, and you can see the people standing on the cliffs. That is a reference again to the Dogon people, whose history and cosmology was reflected in different places throughout this movie. Especially when they say that the Wakandans, they moved to a less desirable area to move away from the colonizers. Well, that's what happened in reality with the Dogon. So the Dogon, with their high knowledge and all of that type of thing, were not the best warriors. They moved into the less attractive area, which is the Bandiagara cliffs of Bandiagara escarpments in contemporary Mali, and they actually live um, in these high and in this escarpment. Now you see the image; those are the actual homes of the Dogon, even though you can't see them. But the Dogon, like I said, extraordinarily knowledgeable and intelligent, and they are able to grow crops and survive in this environment. So again, another reference. There were, I thought, some issues with the movie, and I think that the number one issue that I had was that first and foremost in this film was white sensibilities. And I know some of you, they do not believe that you should criticize or analyze some of these things that the majority of people are emotionally attached to. So if that's your line of thinking, you might want to go ahead and leave this video right now. But it was very obvious to me that this was not a black movie. And the reason why I say it's not a black movie, because to me, what makes a movie black is whose sensibilities are a priority when the movie is made. And also, you know, if it's a black movie, are they willing to show black on white violence in any meaningful way? And no, we don't see that at all. So there's some really obvious things that support what I'm saying, and one of them was the character of the CIA agent. So let's really look at that. He's the one who was actually buying the vibranium from Claus. Um, and so he went from being just an obvious villain to being an obvious white savior, which is one of the favorite motifs of the Western world, the whole white savior thing. And that's, and when I say Western world, I mean the blacks and the whites, from Jesus onward to Bill Clinton. Blacks have really adopted this whole notion of the white man who really cares about them, despite just white privilege or white racism or supremacy or whatever it is you want to call it. And so all the CIA agent, and we all know the history of the CIA in Africa. They're responsible for the collapse of Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, responsible for the collapse of Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, and the CIA is responsible for toppling a number of democratically elected regimes throughout the whole world. But that aspect of it all um, just never really fully came through in the movie. There was a kind of like a few little humorous jokey jokes here and there, but that aspect of it never really came through. So here we are, the CIA agent who was just really trying to get the vibranium and willing to deal with arms dealers or whoever else is all of a sudden going to jump in front of the bullet to save Lupita's character. No, that was just a device to transition the white man from villain to savior, and all of, a good white man who who remain in the film throughout the rest of the film. That was just a strategy, right? Because this film is targeted toward the West, and it's good business to have a white man situated in the film positively. And I say that because like the movie has broken records, but from what I have read, 33% of the film, or 33% of the people who have seen this movie are white. But even in the theater, when the sister Shuri said that, another broken white boy for me to fix. I can see the whites fidgeting at that time. I'm like, wow, y'all are so fragile. If y'all had to deal with what we had to deal with, you all couldn't make it. But anyway, I really didn't like that aspect of the movie. I really didn't see. Well, I guess if you want to break box office records, then it wouldn't kill you to have like this same old white savior, good white man theme throughout in the movie. And another thing that I found really interesting about this movie, which made it clear to me that white sensibilities were foremost in this film, is that to any righteous person, right, on the outside looking in, a principled person, then why wouldn't Killmonger be the hero, right? I mean, Killmonger actually evolved past tribalism. For anybody who's knowledgeable of the experience of black people throughout the world, you know that the main reason why blacks were colonized and enslaved and are in a very weakened position even now in the Western world is because of just tribalism, disloyalty, and treachery on every occasion. That's how whites were able to march into Africa and weaken the defenses of some of these empires that we're really proud of. But you can see that Killmonger evolved past tribalism, unlike T'Challa's like really closed position. I mean, T'Challa, he was kind of like the Russians during the Cold War, right? I mean, very closed. We don't want to interact with anybody unless they're already an ally or under our rule. So T'Challa to me was very unimpressive. I'll talk more about that. But Killmonger had evolved past tribalism, which is the number one problem that the multitudes of black people across the globe have. I mean, that's everywhere you go. People in in the United States, who's from the north, who's from the south, who's light skinned, who's dark skinned, even in your own neighborhood, in your own cities, who's west side, who's east side, who's north side, who's south side. And we have a tendency to take that a bit too far. And of course, you see the same thing in Africa with the conflict over class and also ethnicity, oftentimes with those flames fanned by the Westerners or people who allied themselves with the Westerners. And another important reason why I would say Killmonger is a hero is because Killmonger took the important step of putting ideology over phenotype. And the preoccupation with phenotypes, that's one of the greatest threats to humanity in all throughout the whole of the Piscean age over the past 2,000 years. And it will be one of the greatest threats going into the Aquarius age over the next 2,165 years. So when I say phenotype, I mean physical makeup, like melanin and things like that. Whose skin is dark now? How many times have blacks been wrong-headed or misled because they assumed that somebody with black skin was their ally, or some elected official with black skin had their best interest in mind? So that, for those reasons, I'll say that Killmonger was kind of like Garvey, way before his time. And another one of my problems with the movie is the way that they vilified Killmonger. It was kind of humorous from my point of view too. Like, and one of the things is like when Killmonger said that he learns from the enemies, and him learning from the enemies is associated with the violence that he displayed. But that went against what we're all taught. Overwhelmingly most black people in the Western world. And when I say Western world, I'm including Africa, because they are within the sphere of influence of the Western world. And that is the whole idea that you have to be better than the people who are oppressing you. That is a mainstay in in black cultures throughout the world. You have to be forgiving to the whites. Don't be jaded. Don't be confrontational. Don't be like them. Be better than them. I mean, that behavior was reinforced on the plantation, and then it's still a part of our subconscious thinking. It's, even for those of us who have evolved beyond plantation Christianity. So him saying that kind of went against what we have been socialized to believe. And then another way I thought that he was vilified was in his violence against women. Just look at it. All right, there's violence throughout the whole film, but who is the only person that killed any woman? It was Killmonger. And when he shot that light-skinned girl, oh man, I mean, in many people's minds and heart, that's when he instantaneously became a villain. And everybody loves a light-skinned, frizzy-haired mulatta, and for him to just shoot that light-skinned girl like that, man, it's like that really tugged on people emotions and vilifying Killmonger. So one of the interesting things about that is, if you go back to the Black Panther story of 1966, it's Killmonger who's saying, let's hold on to traditional African culture, and it's T'Challa who's saying that that is not the most important thing, and even if we do that, we can't do that by practicing violence against these other peoples. But of course, obviously, Killmonger's usage of violence is was intelligent, and so that's just the whole idea of violence. I think is something that the dominant culture have been trying to discourage and dissuade blacks from practicing, especially violence against non-black people. And so I tended to identify more so in this film with Killmonger, and I think a lot of conscientious people did too. Not to say that I think the people who didn't identify him and who didn't identify with him are asleep. And of course, not to say that those people are not asleep. So having said all of that, I'm gonna go ahead and give my rating for the movie, and my rating for the movie is a 7 um, out of 10. And the reason why I give it a 7 out of 10, like I said, I like the Africanisms a lot. It was interesting. Marvel comics are typically interesting. However, I thought the storyline to me was very dull, was very boring. Um, Characters like Luke Cage and Daredevil, I think, are even far more interesting than T'Challa's dull um, character. And there wasn't a lot of suspense for me. Like, there's some movies where you see suspense, like Usual Suspects, right? Things they keep you on the edge, and then there's like a aha moment at the end. But this movie didn't have any of that. There was really nothing really suspenseful um, about it. I think that there was some great humor in it. I thought it was many occasions, like when they went into the bar in Korea, and T'Challa was asking, "Well, is there going to be any trouble tonight?" And Lupita told him, "That depends on how soon we get done with this mission." It was just, I thought there were several parts of the film where the humor was really good, um, but I was unimpressed, and you just see so many of the boring Western motifs, like the whole white savior thing. I can't think of the name of the movie, but there's one movie where this white cop is popular. All of you guys are thinking, probably saying the name of it right now, but the white cop is touching this woman, sexually abusing this woman in front of her husband, but it's a cop, so the man can't do anything. So popular Western American cinema never gets tired of castrating black men, and then they always, not always, but always vindicate the white man, as you saw in this movie where I'm talking about, where in the end of the movie the woman is in a car accident, and that same white cop comes and saves her life. Instant vindication for the white man. So this what was first and foremost in this film is white sensibilities, which is why I say it was an interesting white movie about black black people, about fictional black people. So I thought it was a 7 out of 10. Um, I can't really doo-doo on it, but I can't really say, ooh, I can't wait to see it again and tell other people that I think that they should see it. Now, one film that I do think everybody should see is The Spook Who Sat by the Door. Now, this is a black movie, and it is about a man who was a former CIA agent who used that knowledge and created his own underground army. Hence the name, The Spook Who Sat by the Door, double meaning there for spook as a spy, and also spook as a black person. And this movie has violence, but it's well thought out, well conceived violence for a purpose, and it puts black sensibilities first and foremost. So much to the extent that this movie, when it came out in 1973, is based on a book that came out about 69. But when it came out in 73, it was very popular in the theaters, and the FBI went theater to theater to ensure that they took this movie out of the theater, because black masculinity, black aggressiveness is really uncomfortable for whites to see. That's why, like, little things, like, that's why they hate to see things like black people celebrating when they celebrate in the end zone, or when they talk athletes talk politics and things like that. That that really bothers the dominant culture. So this movie shows black assertiveness and and violence against whites. You know, for the purpose of black liberation. So I would encourage everybody to see this. If you really like the whole black pride aspect of Black Panther, then you'll love this movie. And lastly, if you want to learn more about the Africanisms that I mentioned, and just some of the historical and conceptual things that I have been talking about in this slideshow presentation, then you definitely want to get the book Beyond Ma'afa, Black History from Human Origins to Recent Times. So this book is really cutting edge. Like I say about this book, it's Black History for the 21st Century. And the title Beyond Ma'afa, Ma'afa means it's a Swahili word. We use that instead of slavery. So what this book does, it goes beyond Ma'afa in a sense is that it doesn't begin black history with slavery, which is the way many people in the Western world conceive of black history, and it goes beyond Ma'afa, and that towards the end of the book, it addresses some of the ways that we can go beyond the remnants or nullify the remnants of slavery that is still with us today. So for more books, reviews, blog postings similar to this one, go to spiritofafrica.co, and I'm sure you will appreciate what you find there. So thank you very much for listening and also watching this presentation.